I've been a remote worker for a long time pre-pandemic.
Okay.
So I suppose I would have worked remotely in the US from about 2003 to 2006, and I was managing global team from San Diego. So I would have been very used to working remotely from, you know, with people from Asia across different time zones, vastly differing time zones. And then from 2006 to about 2016, I worked from Ireland, in my home, working remotely. Again, managing remote teams across various different time zones, and would not have had, we'll say, Teams or Zoom or anything like that. It would have been teleconferences. So I would have had a lot of experience in being remote, managing remotely, and managing global teams. And I also would have figured out the best ways of doing that, and in terms of work-life balance, but also in, you know, especially when you're working from your home, as opposed to working in a central work location with other people remotely. So I was very much of the working from home kind of remote worker. And I would say to start off with, it was quite difficult, but over time I got some tips and tricks. So I've a fair bit of experience in this. So if I bring that back to your first question, which is, you know, how did my life change? I went from working very remotely, or 100% remote, when I started working in, ATU Sligo. It was pretty much back to 100% face to face. So I found that very challenging, because I felt I was very unproductive. I felt I was very, time bound as to, gosh, I can only get things done when you can actually face to face meet people. And so I found that transition backwards very challenging. So for me, the change in the pandemic was, I could say, pretty much positive, because I was used to this. And then suddenly everybody else had to get on board. So for me, I felt like it was positive in that I got a lot more work done. I was far more productive. Projects and programs that I was working on, and as people got more familiar with working with Teams and Zoom, I felt like, you know, it was just way better. And my work-life balance improved, my flexibility improved, because, you know, I have children at school, and I was able to work around, doing stuff with them. Of course, they were off school.
Of course, yeah.
And working, doing remote schooling, that was challenging, and trying to juggle school, your own work. And I think that there were phases along the pandemic. I think in the very first early stages was nothing was getting done because people weren't used to remote working. So it was almost like a couple of weeks of extra holidays is what
novelty factor.
Yeah, novelty factor. And then people got au fait with the technology, and that's when I found, oh wow, this is great. I'm well used to this. Plus, there's additional technology that is in it now that wasn't in it when I was doing it before. So it made, the interacting with people much easier, because you can see their face. And there was a little bit of Zoom or Teams fatigue, especially I found when you're dealing with a lot of people on a call. I found myself probably a little bit more tired. And I think, there may be even some studies done to show that your eyes, just even connecting with loads of people on the screen, it can just cause you extra fatigue. But in general, I would have more of a positive reaction. I would have had more of a positive reaction. And I think as people got more au fait with the technology, it was better. I suppose some of the downsides, these would have been things that I knew before, like you do lose connection with people. I was sitting in an office with a group of people that I wasn't actually dealing with work-wise on a daily basis. So I actually lost contact with those, because I wasn't involved in projects with them. And
they were your social connections.
Yeah, so the social connections, you have to try a little bit harder to stay connected to those. And you weren't necessarily aware of what was going on in their world because you weren't connecting with them. So I'd say, that would be the main things that I would think of. But in general, for me, it was more of a positive thing. And it, I'd say the difficulty, because it was because of the pandemic, was juggling kids, school, all of that. That was a struggle. But in the actual work piece of it, for me, it was far more productive.
I think you've already answered question 2 then, in terms of, work-life balance and digital well-being, because you were already so au fait with the digital process. I mean, maybe you could touch on some of the tools then that were new to you.
I'm very lucky that because I was working remotely for such a long time, I already have an office at home. It is a separate, it's not a separate bit in a separate building, but it is an office. It is a fully functional office, so I can close the door on that. I think that is a critical tool when you're working from home. You have to have somewhere that is work, that you can close the door on and just, that's it, done. I'm done for the day. That's something that I found critical. Otherwise, if you're doing it from the sitting room or the kitchen or the whatever, the lines become very blurred and you'll just pop in and out of things and you're not really focusing on anything particularly well. So I found critical to have a space, a dedicated space that I could close the door to. When I'm at work, I'm at work. And when I'm at home, I'm at home. They were critical things, having like kind of set times, your work times, having them set, you start at whatever time, you finish at whatever time. That's actually critical, because it's very easy to get sucked into, sure, I'll just go and do another bit after the dinner's over or the whatever, The thing that I have always struggled with and still struggle with is taking adequate breaks. I find, and I did, as I just said to you before the recording, I did my master's thesis on remote working, and I interviewed a lot of people globally, and one of the things that they all said was, and the research would show that people tend to work longer and more when you are working from home or working remotely. And I found that myself. I would have set start and finish times, but taking breaks is not something that I'd be brilliant at, and I would have to force myself to say, look, I need to go and take a cup of tea, a tea break, or take adequate time for lunch. And that's something I still struggle with, because I'd be just like, I might bring it back to the desk or bring the tea back to the desk. That's still a struggle. And it's, it's very easy to just bring it back to the desk and not take that breath of air outside. When it's mad, really, because it's much easier to
ironic
5-minute walk or the whatever. So there's some of the tips and tricks that I found is I'd say absolutely the space, the opening and closing times, so to speak, and making sure that you shut off. In the evening times, I'd be fairly good at saying, I'm not going to be answering emails on my phone. That's a big difference that I found, is that when I was working for a multinational, because the time zones are different, you would be getting emails day and night. You would be having teleconferences at 2 a.m, 6 a.m, 10, 11 at night. And so work was always on. In this environment that I'm in the public sector in Ireland, it's not like that. So people finish at a time, and you don't generally get a load of emails in the middle of the night. So you don't have, there's not this impetus of responding every second. So it's actually much easier for me to manage the switch off of the email on the phone than it would have been in my previous roles. Where
that sounds healthier.
That was very, it was much more difficult in my multinational career to switch off than it is currently.
I can understand that. And have you received any support? So we're talking about from, I suppose, the workplace in terms of improving your work-life balance or digital?
I think that one of the things they did really well to start off with was, in the early stages of the pandemic, realizing that people are juggling a million different things. So I think ATU Sligo was extremely good at supporting people. You might be caring for children at home, you might be caring for older people, you may have all sorts of different responsibilities. And one really nice thing that they did was they, set the expectation that, as long as you get your work done, it doesn't actually matter what time or when, you've got, what you need to do, just do it when you can, And there was one really subtle little thing, but it made a difference. Was as an attachment, sort of a subheader for the emails, was a lot of the management team we were putting, we recognize that your work day may not be the same time as my work day, so don't feel compelled to reply immediately to this email. reply at a time that makes sense for you.
Okay.
And even to this day, that subheader on the emails is still there. And I think that was actually quite a, small but impactful thing.
Mhm.
The other support, as we're kind of coming out of this almost 100% remote working, is that they put in place, patterns to encompass remote working where it's appropriate.
Okay.
So we would have some level of choice over whether we want to work 100% on campus, 100% remotely, or some hybrid of that. And that's a discussion to have with your line manager as to what your role is appropriate for. So that's something that has come in that I think has been a good support.
That's nice to have that flexibility.
Yeah, because I think everybody, even people that would have been like, oh gosh, never done this before, I think everybody has realized the level of flexibility that it has provided for them has been a benefit, and would like to retain some level of flexibility, even if, they're still going back into the campus,
And I suppose the last question is, it's maybe not appropriate for yourself, but it's, I suppose, what lessons have you learned that have helped you improve your work-life balance and digital well-being? Again, you've probably touched on a lot of this. But have you anything else to add?
Yeah, I suppose the flexibility is always very, very handy, especially when you've got children, drop-offs for school and picking up and various different things like that. When you could be juggling different kind of caring, I think it has shown people that you do not have to be sitting behind a desk in a particular place in order to get your work done, and to get your work done really well, So I think it has shown that. That's a big lessons learned. And when I started in this environment, I wished that people would realize that, gosh, like half the time I don't need to be in this building. I could be doing this anywhere. And I think as well, there's a huge environmental impact, that has been a benefit. That's a big lessons learned, that you can work very successfully from anywhere. And I agree, there's a level of balance needed. Even though I'd be a big supporter of remote working, I still feel that there's times where I do need to go on campus. I do need to go and visit a company. I do need to get out, because that's how you create a bit more of a different relationship. So that's a lesson, that I think some level of balance is required. But it can be very, very productive. And I think the other thing that it will be a learning for me is, when you're working remotely, you have to feel like you're working. And for me, it's like, I know a lot of people were saying, oh, I'm going to work in my pajamas. Like, even though I'm in a hoodie now, I'm in clothes, I'm not in my pajamas. So I actually feel that it's important to, go and do some sort of a daily routine that makes you feel like you are going to work, as opposed to dragging yourself out of the bed and so they'd be kind of things. And I mentioned some of the other things earlier, like having that separate space, putting some constraints around your working time, that kind of thing.